Welcome, everyone. We're thankful for those of you who came, and we are so appreciative and thankful for Sam joining us again today. This is the third time he's come to speak to HERJC, and we're very excited to have him back, but also really looking forward to this update that he's going to give us about what's going on in Israel. We all know that Sam is political correspondent for the Times of Israel, and I introduce you now to Sam Sokol.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Uh, so the last year in Israel has been one of the more surreal times uh, to be Israeli, and especially to be a journalist in this country. Uh, the last time I spoke to you was to your show was during Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to overhaul the judiciary in the summer of 2023. And there was a very, very different time. Uh, you know, During that year, from the end of 2022 to the end of 2023, the main threat that many Israelis saw was an internal threat to democracy and a uh, possibility of worsening civil strife due to the expanding cleavages between left and right, populist and moderate, people in favor of the rule of law and people in favor of sidelining the judiciary. And there was a lot of concern about what could happen internally. And to the degree that most people thought about threats coming in from the outside, it was something that was raised over and over, especially in security circles, but most citizens didn't think about that. And for those who did, people thought, okay, something could happen, in the north, something could happen in the West Bank. Nobody was thinking about Gaza. Absolutely nobody was thinking about Gaza. Kids are making noises in the other room. Nobody was thinking about Gaza whatsoever. It just wasn't something on our radar. The feeling was among most Israelis that Gaza was contained. Every few years, they'll shoot some rockets at us. We'll pound them with airstrikes, and it'll end. Rinse, wash, and repeat. It was something that was considered manageable. And that's sort of where we fell down as a country because things were very much not manageable. And as we learned more and more about the planning behind October 7th and the thinking of Hamas since the beginning of the war. What's emerged has been a picture of a terrorist organization that, while already planning October 7th, chose its timing and based its plans around the fact that it really felt that Israel had weakened to the point where, with one good crack, it would break. Uh, Large numbers of reservists were saying they would refuse to go to reserve duty if the government passed its overhaul, saying they wouldn't serve a dictatorship. And, our enemies were paying attention. It's also important to note that Israelis had a certain strategic conception, as I said, that the South was manageable. Look, over the past few years, we've seen rising violence in the West Bank, both from Palestinians and from hard right settler extremists who the government has very much neglected to rein in. And there was a feeling that things could collapse in the West Bank. But Gaza, as I said, contained. And we were stuck in a sort of strategic conception that blinded our eyes. Uh, you hear a lot about this in the discourse in Israel now, the idea of hakoncepsia, the conception. This idea that, Bibi would keep sending Qatari money in suitcases to Hamas. It would buy them off. Hamas wasn't interested in a major conflict. They wanted to maintain their rule in Gaza. And this whole time, Hamas was preparing for the big strike. And a lot of these signs were ignored, not because of some conspiracy, not because Israelis are dumb, not because of name whatever excuse you or theory you want. It had to do with one main thing, which was when you are thinking within a certain paradigm, you interpret everything that you see within that framework. And so when, the Tatzpitaniot, the mostly female border observation soldiers were warning about increased exercises, it was sidelined. When there were warnings about Hamas plans to go over the border, they were interpreted as something that Hamas either something that they wanted to do but couldn't, or just, the type of plans every military force makes plans doesn't mean they're going to do it. You have contingencies. But everything was sort of explained away. Uh, we're hearing more and more now reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ignored warnings and even allegedly tried to change protocols in the records in Prime Minister's office to hide the fact that he had been warned. We'll get to that issue that ties into this whole Prime Minister's office leaks scandal that's unfolding now. But for now, let's discuss the fact that we were completely taken by surprise on October 7th. Now, personally, I was still working at Haaretz on October 7th, and I had a major asthma exacerbation at the time. I was actually hospitalized at Hadassah Ein Kerem in Jerusalem over Simchat Torah, October 7th, and I was, bedridden on oxygen. And I wake up in the morning of Simchat Torah, and the guy in the bed next to me in the hospital room is listening to the news on a very loud volume. And I hobble over and I sit next to him and I look over his shoulder, and it's news about, gunmen in Sderot, terror attack. And at first, we thought it's a regular attack. These things happen. This is more than we've ever seen before. They never managed to do this, but it's within the realm of the imaginable. And as the morning went on, more and more reports were coming in. We slowly start to understand the extent of what was happening. And it was very scary. My boss at the time at Haaretz actually lived in Nahal Oz on the Gaza border. He ended up having to hide in the dark on the floor for about 10 hours with his wife and kids until, actually, I don't know, you might have seen this on 60 Minutes. Amir Tibon from Haaretz, his father, Noam Tibon, a retired IDF general, grabbed a gun and his car keys, drove down from Tel Aviv, gathered a bunch of soldiers on the way, and went house to house, killing Hamas militants, terrorists, until he actually rescued his family. A lot of other people weren't as lucky. And the death toll was horrendous. The problem was we weren't set up for it. As I said, most people were expecting something to happen in Yosh, in Yehuda v'Shomron, in the West Bank. So, forces weren't deployed properly. The response was somewhat chaotic. You have to redeploy from one end of the country to the other. One guy in a car could drive it fast, but if you're redeploying large numbers of troops, it takes time. So Hamas was basically allowed to run rampant for quite a while. And as the day went on, we started getting rocket alert sirens going off in Jerusalem. And let me tell you, if you ever have to run for cover, while dragging an IV and barely able to breathe, it's not a fun experience. But we had to do this several times. And, it was a big psychic shock. Beyond the shock of being attacked, it was the shock of being attacked from somewhere where we never expected. We never thought it would happen. It was not only the shock of what happened, but the destruction of our conceptions and illusions, which was so devastating to Israelis that we just did not imagine this would happen. This could happen. And the next day, on October 8th, Hezbollah joined in sympathy with Hamas, sending rockets on our northern towns, displacing more than 60,000 people, many of whom still have not returned home, and starting a war which has now dragged on for a year. Israel has, over the course of this period, taken over large tracts of Gaza. It'll take a part of Gaza, it'll move on, it'll go back. And at no point has Israel put in any sort of governing apparatus. Now, the problem is that there's been deep divisions within the government the whole time on what has to go in. Are we bringing in some of our Arab allies in the region for some sort of interim administration backed by, the fig leaf of the ostensibly the Palestinian Authority running things? Are we having a military occupation and rebuilding of settlements? And sort of the problem in the interim has been, rather than implement anything to try to fill the void, and I'm of necessity simplifying a lot here, but we have a lot of ground to cover. Israel has essentially pushed off decisions on the day after on the governance of Gaza, so that it feels to a certain degree like we're stumbling around in the dark. We've destroyed Hamas as as a cohesive military organization that can threaten Israel the way it did on October 7th. But we have not won to the degree that we can safely pull out and say that we've won, because we haven't taken the necessary steps to do so. Now, after October 7th, a lot of that sort of social division that had characterized the year leading up to October 7th suddenly sort of disappeared. The new slogan in Israel was "Biachad ninatzeach," together we will win, we'll have victory. And at first, it really looked like people were coming together. You started seeing ultra-Orthodox people volunteering to bring supplies to the troops. I actually did a story for Haaretz about a group of Haredim from Jerusalem who would drive down to the Gaza border to bring cholent to the troops every week. And I actually spent one night standing in body armor on the Gaza border, listening to bombs go off in Gaza, drinking wine, eating cholent, and watching soldiers and Hasidim dance on the side of the road. I didn't know if I was at a rave, a synagogue, or a war. It was very, very bizarre, especially when the Nanachs pulled up and they started playing Hasidic techno music. But I think that's sort of representative of what was going on, because everything was what they call in Hebrew a balagan, total chaos. But the members of the pre-October 7th protest movement, went into the reserves and mobilized to bring supplies to the troops, and the country really came together. And that lasted for a few months before it totally fell apart again. We saw Benny Gantz from the centrist Hamachaneh HaMamlachti National Unity Party come into the government, become part of Netanyahu's war cabinet. Along with him came Gidon Saar's right-wing New Hope opposition party. And, there was sort of a hope that they would be able to prove a counterpoint to the far-right parties of Itamar Ben-Gvir's Otzma Yehudit, which is a Kahanist party, and Bezalel Smotrich's Tzionut Hadatit, Religious Zionism Party, which is a far-right party as well. But within a few months, Gantz and Saar had quit, heavily criticizing Netanyahu's running of the war. Netanyahu's popularity was in the toilet because everyone blamed him for October 7th, but he wouldn't take responsibility. And Netanyahu was increasingly at loggerheads with Yoav Gallant, his defense minister from his ruling Likud party, over several issues, one of which was the fact that Netanyahu refused to establish a state commission of inquiry into October 7th. And the two other issues were the ultra-Orthodox draft and the issue of the ultra-Orthodox draft, and the issue of a hostage deal. Now, there was an initial hostage deal in November, but since then, Hamas was recalcitrant, wouldn't come to the table unless Israel promised an end to the war. And at the same time, Netanyahu was not willing to make smaller concessions, which the heads of the security services said would be within where Israel could afford to make. There was a very big disagreement here. The security services said we have crushed them enough to be able to pull out from Gaza for 6 weeks and then go back in. Netanyahu's response is, no, we can't. We'll lose legitimacy to go back in if we do. And so we started to see a massive protest movement starting up, pushing Netanyahu to come to a deal, which Netanyahu never actually did. At the same time, we've seen a massive call up of Israelis. I got my patur, from reserve duty a couple years ago after years of reserve duty. But and I haven't been called, but my friends have go for reserve duty. They'll go to Gaza or Lebanon or wherever, with the West Bank. They'll serve. They'll go home. They'll get called again. It's ruined people's livelihoods, ruined marriages. People have had to quit university studies. And at the same time, you have more than 60,000. I think the number is like 66. I don't remember the exact number. Very similar number to the number of people displaced from the north, actually. But more than 60,000 ultra-Orthodox men of draft age who have been given exemptions. And Netanyahu has been fighting very hard to maintain that because the ultra-Orthodox parties are necessary for him to keep his coalition. So what happened this summer along those lines was something very interesting, which was finally, after years of fighting on this issue, after decades of fighting this issue, and after months of Netanyahu trying to ram a bill through the Knesset, which would technically draft the ultra-Orthodox, but allow them to keep their exemption on a practical level, the High Court of Justice intervened and said, listen, the exemptions for the ultra-Orthodox no longer have a basis in law. They must be recruited. To which Netanyahu immediately tried to pass legislation, to make a big push to pass legislation which would slow down the rate at which they could be enlisted to keep the ultra-Orthodox happy. This has proved to be very divisive within Israel. And in fact, data that's come out from the IDF and from the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee has shown that from, pretty much 100% participation in reserve duty from people who've been called up, it's gone down to something like 85% because people are just tired and there's growing resentment of the ultra-Orthodox. Now, during this whole period of the past year, the government has not only started to hint repeatedly at trying to bring back the judicial overhaul, but we're seeing increasing pressure to fire the attorney general and to sort of get rid of the gatekeepers. And we're seeing the government trying to bring back the kind of divisive politics that led to where we are now in the first place. Now, as I said, Gantz and Saar came back to the government, but quit. But Saar recently came back to the government again after Israel started really making aggressive moves in Lebanon, saying, okay, the government's now doing things the way I want it to be doing. And that gave Netanyahu the flexibility politically to fire Defense Minister Gallant and begin something of a purge of his opponents within the government, sidelining MKs within the coalition who oppose his efforts on the draft, and trying to push things through. He still doesn't really have an ability to do anything because the head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Yuli Edelstein, a member of his own party, is standing in the way of advancing the bill. And that has enraged the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox recently have said that they would tank the passage of the state budget for 2025 if they don't get draft legislation the way they want on conscription. They recently backed down on that threat because it doesn't look like they're actually going to follow through on any of this, and demanded other legislation which would reinstate government benefits, which are now, since the summer, denied to members of the ultra-Orthodox community who don't serve in the army. They've also failed on that. And so we're seeing a big push by Netanyahu to exempt the ultra-Orthodox in the middle of a war, to duck responsibility for what happened on October 7th. And in recent weeks, we've begun to see the unfolding of a leak scandal in the Prime Minister's office. And sort of to simplify a lot, because as I said, we're covering a lot of ground here, but allegedly, IDF non-commissioned officers stole and leaked classified data relating to the hostages, passed it on to an aide and spokesman for Netanyahu, who then, through third parties, passed it on to the German newspaper Bild in an effort to sort of push the focus off Netanyahu on the hostage issue, to remove any sort of guilt that Netanyahu might have on it, at least in terms of appearances. And he is now accused of endangering state security through illegal leaks. And there's a big question: what did Netanyahu know? When did he know it? And at the same time, as I said, there's reports that people in Netanyahu's office actually tried to blackmail an IDF officer over, the issue of changing protocols in the, in the records of the PM's office for who knew what when on October 7th. And essentially, what we're seeing is sort of a return to the old politics on steroids. The government has passed a number of bills recently which would make it easier for the police to spy on Israeli citizens, to put travel and speech restrictions on Israelis based on secret evidence. These are all things that are going through the process. And they recently passed a bill which would allow the interior minister to, after one hearing in front of the minister, to expel and deport for a period of years relatives of Israelis who carry out terror attacks if they should have been expected to know about what was happening and didn't report it, meaning not even going through the judicial system, and expelling citizens from the country. So we're seeing like a lot of efforts to sort of bring in anti-democratic or illiberal legislation. In fact, one of the bills being pushed now there's two bills being pushed now which would give the government more direct control over the independent state broadcaster, and a second bill which would actually force the government to privatize it, sell it off, and if it doesn't manage to sell it off, to close it within 2 years. So there's sort of a feeling that this government, while it can, is still trying to push a very extreme agenda that is, upsetting a lot of Israelis. A lot of the infighting is continuing, and despite the fact that the ultra-Orthodox are very much needed, Netanyahu is doing everything he can to exempt them. At the same time, I mentioned earlier the issue with the concern what will happen in the West Bank. Now, in the West Bank, we've been having trouble with extremist settlers, and the new defense minister, after Gallant was fired, is Yisrael Katz, who was formerly the foreign minister, and Katz just announced on Friday that he would stop using administrative detention against violent settlers. Now, administrative detention is a holdover from the British Mandate period, and what it essentially says is that in the territories, not within like Israel proper, but within the territories, Palestinians and Israelis can be detained indefinitely if there's enough intelligence to know they're going to do something, but not enough intelligence to charge them. Now, this is, on the face of it, this is a tool which is legally problematic. It harms people's rights. But the people who are saying to sort of, we don't need this anymore, have been saying, we have legal options within the law to use against violent settlers. But these, other tools are never used, leaving administrative detention the one effective tool that we have left, and they're getting rid of it. So, I think there's a lot of people on the center and left in Israel see a lot of cause for concern at the moment. In Lebanon, things are a little more potentially optimistic. Israel managed to take out through blowing up, a lot of the communications devices used by Hezbollah, beepers and walkie-talkies that we managed to plant into their supply chain, take out a lot of their command and control. Israeli strikes have taken out many of their top people again and again and again. And Israel has slowly been pushing further and further in, creating a buffer zone where we're getting rid of most of their short and medium range weapons, even if they have enough long range weapons to keep pounding central Israel, which they are very much doing. But Israel's successes there have led to the point where it is increasingly looking like there could be a negotiated settlement which would bring the Lebanese army into southern Lebanon to displace Hezbollah. We'll see what actually happens in the end, but it looks like there might be room for optimism there. Now, I'm probably missing a lot because I'm trying to shove an entire year's worth of stuff here. But I'd like to describe a little bit of what I saw recently in Lebanon. And say I'm going to turn on screen sharing. One second. What's this? Sorry, just give me a sec. Oh, no, that's a whiteboard. Sorry, usually you don't use this in presentations, but I have some interesting material to show you. There we go. Do you all see the image? Is that coming up? Okay, one second.
We only saw your icons of images. We didn't see the actual image.
Okay, one second then. One moment. Okay, screen share. Here. So this is me in southern Lebanon in the basement of an Arab house speaking to a soldier. Basically what happened is about a month ago, I was invited to go in with members of Khatibat Shesh Etzioni, the 6th Brigade reservist unit, which was conducting sweep and clear operations in southwestern Lebanon. Basically what they were doing was going through villages that had been turned into Hamas strong points and going house to house, rooting out equipment, finding tunnels. Now, what had happened is in the beginning of the war, when Hezbollah started attacking us from the north, Israel would shoot back and hit whatever Hezbollah targets it could. And Hezbollah had taken a lot of villages in southern Lebanon and turned them into Hezbollah strong points. And as Hezbollah and Israel shot back and forth, these villages became depopulated of any civilians. The only people left were Hezbollah. And they basically staged weapons, ammunition in every single house that they could. These villages were just filled to the brim with weapons. And so when it was finally time for Israel to go on the offensive, since there were no civilians left in these villages, they started pounding these villages from the air, artillery, airstrikes, man-portable rockets, and then going in and cleaning up however many Hezbollah fighters were left. So when I went in with these troops, we were going door to door in the village, and they were showing us all the ammunition they were finding, all the weapons they were finding, and there was almost nothing left. So we would go into a house and we would find boxes of claymore mines. These are basically anti-personnel mines. Imagine a directional mine you set up that shoots out a scatter gun of small metal balls, essentially like a huge shotgun blast. Uh, could just tear people to shreds. So here's an entire box of anti-personnel mines of claymores, and we found this sitting in the living room of a Lebanese family's home, only a few kilometers from the border. Due to the fighting, there was almost nothing left of. You're all seeing this coming through.
Yes.
Almost nothing left of this village. As you see, this is the commander of one of the battalions, and behind him is just absolute ruin. And in this house, you can actually see one Israeli had written, "Toda rabba le'ishti hagibora." Thank you very much to my wife, the hero. One of the things I kept hearing from the reservists was, we have to thank our wives. They're the ones who are doing everything. Because these guys are going for hundreds of days a year. Their wives are left taking care of the family, going to work, doing everything. So, the one thing you keep hearing from the troops was, they kept saying, mention how much our wives are doing. Now, I'm going to pull up here a couple of videos that I want to show, which I think are rather interesting. The first is this is a video of a Hezbollah drone, which was shot down by Israeli forces and actually crashed down maybe 100, 150 yards from where I was standing, just over the crest of a hill. So we would see, over and over this kind of thing happening. It's happening all the time up there. And in fact, one thing that that happens a lot is you're going up there and just all every so often, duck and cover, take cover, something's coming in. I have one more I'm going to show you, which is what happened at the end of the night. Is that the soldiers I was with said that any house that they find with weapons in it would be destroyed. That they would they would blow up afterwards and demolish any house that Hezbollah had used to store weapons. So this is footage that I filmed with an iPhone and night vision scope in the middle of the night, and this is them. Keep in mind, there's no civilians being hurt here. Blowing up a hilltop neighborhood of a village. When the soldiers told me this was 14 buildings that they blew up. So, this is the type of thing that for the most part has been, very, day to day for a lot of people. Uh, Large numbers of Lebanese have been, displaced. Massive numbers of Gazans have been displaced. You know, Massive numbers of Israelis, and we're still sort of stuck in the middle. We need a solution for rebuilding Gaza and implementing some sort of de-Hamasfication. Uh, Hopefully, we'll have a solution to Lebanon sooner rather than later, but this isn't going to end anytime soon. Even if, you know, we declare victory in Gaza tomorrow, whatever victory means in this, context, the problems there are going to be going on for a very long time.
Sam, you've been amazing,
Thank
given us a tremendous amount of information and a lot of stuff to think about. We as a congregation support Israel in general, and just hope that there is that you find some peace and we do find a solution.
And that you stay safe.
Yes.
About to join the army
Oh, right.
just soon. Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Uh,
Well,
Thank you, Sam.
thank you so
It's
much,
been a
Sam.
pleasure.
thank you.
Yes,
Thank
so
you.
much.
Be
Appreciate it.
safe.
All right. All right. Thank you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
We look